it could really solidify him as, okay, it's no longer a top 3 guys and Anthony Richardson. It is these top 4 guys. They're all going in the top 10 without a doubt. And welcome into the Hot Read podcast for Monday, February the 27th. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, director of published content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We are also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network, and I am joined by the man that I will spend a lot of time with in the next 8-9 days or so. It's producer JT. JT, how are you, man? Are you excited for our week?
I'm so excited for this week. We are now, when you're listening to this, 1 day away, but at the time of recording, we are 2 days away from heading up to Indianapolis. And I could not be more excited and stressed because there's still so much work to be done, but I'm more excited than stressed.
No, I agree entirely. JT and I, if you haven't heard, are headed to the Combine this upcoming week. We'll be there Tuesday through Monday, covering anything and everything we can get our hands on. We don't plan on sleeping. We plan on meeting every single person there and talking to every prospect and getting as many interviews as humanly possible and learning as much as we possibly can about like 17 different things. So the to-do list is very long, but my excitement level through the roof. I am so excited. It's going to be an awesome time. And I'm already, my office is kind of a mess currently with stuff and equipment sort of packed up, sort of stacked up, ready to be put away, trying to make sure I have all my T's crossed and my I's dotted because there's a lot to, I'm afraid I'm going to forget something. There's a lot to cover, but when you say stressed, do you mean just as you try to do as much prep as possible? Being stressed about how much there is to,
information overload.
It is just
a peek behind the curtain. When the NFL sent us like the schedule of like when players will be giving their interviews, I mean, it is just list on list on list of just like, there's like,
if you're watching on YouTube, which you should be, there's
like,
back,
it's
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages of spreadsheets with detailed times of who's at what podium. I mean, there's like almost 400 prospect or north of 300 prospects. So I get it, but it's a lot. We're gonna try to cover as big and small prospects. You know, we're gonna try to get as much content for you guys as possible. So in doing that, we want to make sure that we're asking questions tailored to specific prospects and whatnot. Well, that's part of it that makes it easier, right? Because since we're covering the draft as a whole, but we're also a Tennessee Titans show in a Titans market. So we get to focus in on the things that they're going to be interested in, the things that Titans fans are interested in, the things that this team needs. And there are certain, positions we can not ignore all week, but cross off of the top of our to-do list because, we'll pay attention to the quarterbacks regardless, pretty much any year, because that's the NFL. It's what you do. But we're going to pay a lot more attention to, the offensive linemen than the defensive linemen. We're going to pay a lot more attention to the wide receivers and the cornerbacks than we do the safeties and, the running backs. So it does narrow the field a little bit. But there was a point today when I was doing some studying, and today my whole day today has been like running errands, prepping for this show in particular, and then making sure I have prep for the week in general, just continuing to grind as much stuff as I can, like you've been doing. And I reached a realization, a light bulb moment today where I too was stressed out about just the never ending sea of information. You never feel fully equipped in terms of understanding all of these prospects and reading everything you can read and listening to everything you can listen to. And it just hit me at one point, like, I could have started a month ago and spent every waking hour of my life doing this and never have every time I sit down to study it, it feels like a drop in the ocean, right? It feels like I am trying to empty the ocean with a solo cup, and it's just the most fruitless, futile thing ever. So I'm at peace with the fact that we're going to go in not being as prepared as we wish, and we're going to come out not as we're going to come out, I'm sure, with some regrets of things we wish would have done differently, but it's going to be our first time up there, and we're going to create a ton of fantastic content. So I'm at peace with the fact that what we do end up getting while we're there is going to be fantastic. And we're going to learn a lot. So I'm excited to learn a lot. I'm excited to take what we learn and be able to relay it to the people that listen to the show. If you listen to the show, this is not the week to get busy doing other things and get backed up on your podcasts. We're going to be doing a ton of shows on this podcast feed, as well as, I guess I'll go ahead and explain what our next week, I think, looks like. There's a lot TBD. There's a lot that's going to be up to, subject to change based on how the week goes. But for our content plans, we'll be doing, I think, a show on this podcast feed in the video version on YouTube over at YouTube, the Broadway Sports Media YouTube page. We'll be doing a show of the Hot Read podcast every single day while we're there. So I think this comes out on Monday morning, obviously. Tuesday, we'll have a show at some point Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, and then at least one either Saturday or Sunday night, just depending on how the weekend goes. And then, of course, we'll be back with our Monday show Monday morning. Next Monday, I'm sure, recapping a ton from the week. So we're probably going to do a live show for free, not just for Broadway insiders, but for anybody that has YouTube or Twitter or Facebook or whatever social media we broadcast to. We'll be doing a live show each evening, afternoon. It just depends on where it fits best in our schedule. And that show will probably then go live the following morning, discussing the things we'd talked about that day, people we'd talked to, things we had learned, people we'd seen perform, a lot to discuss, maybe even a surprise guest or two on the actual podcast. We also are going to have a ton of videos and Twitter, Instagram, TikTok oriented social media content. I'm sure we'll be interviewing on the side a lot of different prospects, videos from guys at the podium, videos talking to folks along Radio Row and just one-on-one. All of those things will be either encapsulated in or reviewed in our actual show on the podcast feed and on YouTube at the end of each day, or on our Twitter feeds. So make sure you follow us on Twitter. You can find all that information in the description of the podcast to make sure you're up to date. But a ton of shows probably every single day next week, and a ton of content to boot. JT, today's show, which I'm realizing almost 8 minutes into our recording, we've not even explained what today's show is about. But if you're listening to the show and you read the title of the podcast, we are going through, as a combine primer, the 5 questions we're looking to answer in Indianapolis. And we've narrowed it down. We could have done 15 questions and this could be a 3-hour podcast, but we decided we'll have plenty of time and energy let's save some of that time and energy to talk about these things as the week goes on. Let's pace ourselves. We're not even there yet. It's Monday morning. Let's start out with a nice little appetizer, if you will. So that's what we're doing. We've narrowed it down to 5 big picture questions we want answered. We've each got thoughts on these questions. We're probably going to disagree on a couple of the prompts, but these are 5 big questions, some Titan specific, some not, that we are interested in answering, and things we think we're going to have answers to, maybe even some predictions along the line, along the way here, as to what this week looks like and what we come away from this week thinking. Now, we're going to kind of approach this episode from a conversational standpoint, so we might as well go ahead and dive right into this first one. JT, the first question we had, and I'll since I've done most of the talking so far, I'll let you go first with your thoughts. The first question is, which quarterback in this class is going to shine above the rest in Indianapolis?
For me, and it might be a hot take straight out of the gate here, but it's got to be Anthony Richardson, which is,
I think it's rising in popularity.
It really is.
It's the perfectly timed hot take.
It's between him and Will Levis, who are the hot commodities at the combine, because there's just so much unknown with them. We kind of know from their play the last couple of years what Bryce Young and CJ Stroud bring to the table. Of course, watching what they do this week is going to be important, but I think there's nothing more important when assessing these top 4 quarterbacks than watching Anthony Richardson. Mostly because, as I tweeted on Twitter earlier this week, Anthony Richardson is just an absolute wild card if there ever was one in this NFL draft.
Sure.
I think you can look and see that the player comps that have been thrown around, anywhere between just a better Malik Willis all the way up to he's got the arm talent and ability to be the next Josh Allen, just throws him like anywhere. Like, who knows? Well,
there's like 175 different prototypical quarterbacks in between those two guys that
exactly, right?
It's a pretty wide field of view.
But from this question perspective, I think he's going to shine because I just cannot wait to see that arm in action. Like
It's going to be ridiculous.
I've seen so many highlights and tape and just everything now that I just want to see him just let it rip in person.
He's going to be a fire-breathing dragon out there. I mean, he's going to go full nuclear with that arm, and there's not going to be any passes with touch because he doesn't throw with touch at all yet. He hasn't learned that. But the lasers are going. I mean, it's going to be a laser show.
And how he can like shine above the rest this week. If he shows that in the time of him playing this season and now at the combine, if he's worked on some of those things like his footwork and technique, if he shows improvement in those categories, I think we go from talking about him anywhere between like 7 and 15 all the way up to maybe like a top 5 in which he could start next year. And he's not the 1 to 2 year project that most people are making him out to be right now.
Yeah, Anthony Richardson is going to be the guy that maybe has the most buzz, although depending on how Bryce Young shows up, that could change. I'll talk about that in a second. Just to continue with Anthony Richardson before I give my answer, I think the allure of him is going to be strong, and it's going to be one of those things where the traits that he shows on in a controlled setting, the fast track inside in Indianapolis where he's running drills, not in pads, just getting to show off that arm. Like you said, it's going to be ridiculous, and it's going to draw the eye of a ton of scouts and GMs and just further. I mean, they've already got their mouths agape with drool coming out at the idea of him as a prospect, because again, these GMs and scouts don't look at these prospects the same way that the average fan does. They're looking for traits. They're looking for upside. The saying is that if you've done it once, you can do it again. And so while fans might look at a guy's tape in his senior year, his final year of college, and like with CJ Stroud, for example, he looked frustratingly inconsistent all year long. And then in his final game of the season in the playoff against Georgia, he goes thermonuclear and he looks amazing. And it's hard to parse for a lot of fans. Well, okay, he did it once, but where was that the rest of his college career? Like, what, you can't rely on that in the NFL. Whereas GMs and scouts, their perspective on this is, I'm looking for the traits. And if you've done it once, that means you are capable of doing it. And they see a game like that, and that one game is really all it takes to dramatically change folks' opinion. Your professional scouts who are trained on these things change their opinion of a guy in a way that makes him a potential, not just one of the top 4 quarterbacks in the class, but a potential top 2, 3 pick, maybe even the number 1 overall pick, depending on who gets up there and what they want. So there's a lot of room for, if you can show it once this week in Indianapolis, that's going to be enough. And we saw this. We've seen this with pro days in the past. I mean, think back to Zach Wilson throwing one amazing pass on the move across his body, hitting a guy in stride on a go route in his pro day coming out of BYU. That one thing, and that wasn't what got him drafted at number 2 overall, but the kind of meme on draft Twitter and among draft experts is that video may have got him drafted at number 2 overall, because it's the little, even one-off instances like that get people to bite on players, especially at really high leverage positions like quarterback, where teams, whether they're foolish thinking this or not, their perspective is we can really take a guy. We see these guys as balls of clay, right? We can bring them in and mold them to be what we want them to be.
No, I totally agree with you there. And I think that if there is one that is the most ready to be like molded like that, that is CJ Stroud. I think he might be the most NFL ready of any of the guys here. And that might be the case this week. He might come out on top because he just shows up and he looks like he's the most NFL ready.
Well, it's funny you say that, because my actual answer to this question, and if anybody was to prove my answer wrong on this, it would be CJ Stroud. But my answer is that Bryce Young is going to be the guy that shines above the rest, purely because I think that he's poised. JT, earlier this week on Twitter, I tweeted out that the more I watch this quarterback class, the more my opinion shifts from, wow, there are 4 guys in this draft class that could be, franchise studs, franchise quarterbacks that are longtime household names, and teams build around these guys for a decade or two. And that was kind of my perspective going in, and that's where the zeitgeist kind of seemed to be on this quarterback class. But the more I watch them, the more my opinion shifts towards, wow, all four of these guys have real significant flaws, and I don't love any of them. I like all four of them. I don't, to differing extents. I don't love any of these guys. And when you go player by player and talk about the flaws that give me big pause or give anyone big pause on these guys, the only guy whose big flaw is one thing, and that one thing will not be mitigated this week, but might be tossed under the rug a little bit. Maybe there's a damp blanket thrown on the fire alarm here. This is something in your evaluation of this player that is a flashing red light on your dashboard, that red light might randomly just, how sometimes it randomly disappears, and then the next time you get in the car, it's back, and it's like, oh, guess it just faulted. We may have that this weekend in Indianapolis for Bryce Young, because his only flaw is his size. Outside of his size, if you put Bryce Young, the player, the person, the mind, the physical ability, in the body of Anthony Richardson or Will Levis, he would be the unquestioned, without a doubt, in a class of his own, quarterback one in this class. Because outside of his size, which is a really significant factor to take into account, and is something that is, I think, if anything leads to the downfall of his career, it's going to be his size, and namely his durability. It's also the kind of thing that a lot of GMs and scouts are going to be really, really turned off by. But outside of that limiting size that he has, like 5'10", 5'11" on a really good day, and 195, 205 pounds, somewhere in there. Outside of that, he's got it all. And this is the kind of situation where at the combine, he's going to get to choose what he does and doesn't do. He's going to get to choose where he does and doesn't show up for drills and measurements. And he's going to get to choose a little bit what the narrative around him is based on those activities he participates in, and what he says at the podium, and how he interviews when he interviews with 10,000 different people. That's the kind of thing where, again, in this controlled environment where he can pick and choose, he and his team can pick and choose what he does, it could look really good. And he may get out there and throw with these guys, and you're like, okay, I get it. They don't look the same physically. Clearly, Bryce Young is not the size of these other guys. But in terms of an NFL passer, in terms of a football player, in terms of a quarterback, he's the most polished guy. Wow, he's got the best arm. Wow, he's got the strongest ability to move and keep his eyes downfield. Wow, he's got the most comfortability throwing on the move, running to either side. He's really, just the most polished guy. He's clearly got a bigger, more refined toolbox than the rest of these quarterbacks. I kind of think that's how it's going to look. And I think it's going to make a lot of folks maybe forget the size thing a little bit, but maybe continue to pull their hair out over the size, because again, it's so frustrating. If he was just a little bit bigger, if you gave him 2 extra inches and 15 to 20 extra pounds, he'd be that guy. And it's just frustrating that he's not. But the thing that is tangential to that, JT, that I think is going to be an interesting topic this week is, what does he show up looking like? Because I don't know if you've caught wind of this narrative around his plans for the combine over the last month or not. Have you heard about this?
Yeah, it's bulking season, baby.
It is. I mean, it is the bulkiest bulk season of all time for our guy Bryce Young. He comes in again. He was playing in college at a size that he was listed. I think he was listed as 6 foot. He's really. There are pictures out there of him on the Heisman House set for Nissan's commercials, standing next to Kyler Murray, who's a confirmed 5'10". They're the same height. He and Kyler are within an inch of each other. So he's going to be 5'10", 5'11", which isn't, we've seen quarterbacks at that height. That's kind of the very minimum requirement for height in the NFL for quarterbacks. But his size, unlike a guy like Kyler or Russell, he's so slender, man. He's so slender. in combination with the fact that he's not that tall. And so while he played in college at like, a $195, 200, his plan was to come in. I see right here, he's officially listed at 194. His plan, him and his trainer claim he's going to show up next week and jump on that scale at like 215, 220, which I'll eat my shorts if he does. But I do also kind of think it would be the funniest thing ever if he just showed up as Fat Bryce, because there's no way he shows up at 220 as a muscular athletic guy, right? There's no way. If he is that size, he's going to look like you're going to tell in his face, like, oh, this guy's been eating a peanut butter jelly sandwich every single night at 3 a.m., just force feeding himself, shoving it down his throat. That's the only way he puts on that amount of weight in that amount of time.
No, I totally agree with you. It's going to be very interesting because it is the thing that is kind of holding him back. And as we've talked about, he's the one that I really haven't spent any time really at all, if minuscule time, looking at this week in preparing, because we know what he is. He probably has the best traits and talent of all the quarterback prospects out there. It's just his size is just totally just weighs him down. So
it's the biggest pause ever. Yeah.
And it's really the only thing that sadly will matter to most GMs, because he is a very good player. And there's a difference between being NFL ready, like maybe CJ Stroud comes out of there, and having the best traits. And I think we might see that they both shine, in that CJ Stroud is the number one prospect.
Well, Stroud's
plug and play.
Do you mean you think Stroud's going to come out looking like he has the best traits, or this is the most polished? Because traits wise,
most polished.
It's going to be about to say yes, polished. Yeah. I agree. It's going to be one of those two that comes out.
You also
most
have
polished.
Bryce Young, who's going to look the best.
Right, and Richardson's. I mean, in terms of traitsiness, he's going to be the traits guy coming out. Just two more tiny things, and then we can move on. We spent a little bit more time on this question than we will the others, because quarterbacks are interesting, and there's so many different things to tackle on the quarterback front. If these guys, I'll say this, all four of, or I guess all five of the main quarterbacks in this class, when you include Hendon Hooker, he'll be there. He will be, I'm sure, interviewing. I don't think he's going to be doing a whole lot in terms of, I've not heard anything to the effect of he's going to be participating in a lot of the drills and measurements. I'm sure he'll get measured, but that's probably it. Those five guys, they're going to do 10,000 interviews, and they're going to be at the podium and talk to 10,000 people and answer 10 million questions. How they perform in that capacity is just as important to me this week, and getting to hopefully chat with them when they're at the podium. Maybe we get lucky and get to ask them a question or two in person, but last year, I'm struggling to phrase this, but I'll go with an anecdote here. Last season, covering the combine for the Titans for Broadway Sports here from home, doing as much research as I can, consuming as much content from Indianapolis as I could. And Pro Football Talk, Mike Florio and Chris Sims show, they had on, I think, every single major quarterback on one show. They did like 20-minute interview with each of them back to back to back to back to back. And that was the most eye-opening, formative element of my quarterback evaluation last year, outside of just watching the tape that I did, because the way that each of those guys performed, and the very tangible way that when you put those interviews back to back to back like that, and the way that these guys will be at the podium back to back to back, it allows you to directly compare them to one another. It made it pretty clear who I did and didn't think had that intangible leadership ability, that intangible communication ability. And really, and I tweeted this and talked about it at the time on the show, the interview that Malik Willis did with Chris Sims and with Mike Florio on that podcast was the first time, and in hindsight was foreshadowing of how this was going to be a constant thing with Malik. It was the first time that I was really left kind of underwhelmed and concerned about him from a leadership standpoint, from a communication standpoint, from a vocal, leading the charge in the huddle standpoint. He didn't have that that I was looking for, that a lot of the other quarterbacks in last year's class had in that interview. I remember listening to Kenny Pickett right before him, and then going right into Malik, and it's like these are two really different guys in terms of their communication habits and the things they're willing to say, and just kind of the dog that you get come through the audio of the podcast, listening to them interact with folks. That kind of bore itself out to be the case this past season, and getting to talk to Malik a lot in person last year, it really just all confirmed those things. So I'm really curious to see, how do these guys carry themselves at the podium? A guy like Anthony Richardson, that, you know, the project prospect, the guy that everybody is salivating at the idea of, but it's like, do you not? It's scary. Do I pull the trigger? If he performs really well and, you know, wows these teams, these coaches, these GMs in the interviews, and does fantastic on their interview circuit with the media, it could really solidify him as, okay, it's no longer a top 3 guys and Anthony Richardson. It is these top 4 guys. They're all going in the top 10 without a doubt. And Anthony Richardson might even go 3rd or 2nd amongst them.
No, I think so. And it's something that kind of everyone forgets about. The interviews half the battle, especially at the combine. I was
for the quarterback position in particular, right? Because
no, for sure,
that's the thing people are looking for.
And it is kind of, it can also be like a double-edged sword there. In preparing for this week, I've been going back to just some 2022 podcasts and stuff, going over the combine. And it's really funny how a lot of people were like, man, Malik Willis was the best interview I've seen in a while. There's no doubt in my mind he's the first quarterback off the board. And I didn't
understand it at all at the time.
It was really interesting, and it's a double-edged sword. You have to know what you're looking for in those interviews as well, and I think we'll find out how these guys test.
That's a great
when we get the
point.
Opportunity.
That's a great point, because we aren't all looking for the same thing when it comes to interview. Whereas from a physical standpoint, we're looking for guys to reach certain benchmarks, be a certain height, be a certain speed. Do you have a certain velocity on your throw? What kind of arm angles can you throw from? Can you throw running to your left and to your right? Can you throw across your body? Can you put touch on the ball? All of these things, we're looking for the same things. Those are all clear benchmark statistical things we are looking for in agreement. From a intangible personality traits, ability to communicate standpoint, when you're trying to evaluate them as a person through interviews or through press conferences or whatever it may be, I think we're looking for different things. Because I came away from that Malik Willis interview circuit day thinking I'm really not impressed with him compared to the other quarterbacks. And there were a lot of people on Twitter I saw espousing the exact opposite. And it confused me, but it goes to show that we're looking for different things. And it's something that will be interesting with the quarterbacks. All right, we're at the 30-minute mark, and we've spent too long on that one question. Let's get through some of these other ones. And we've got a lot more names to talk about with these other questions, but maybe not as much narrative to dive into. Our second question.
Now. Yeah.
Say that again.
I was just saying, we don't have as much substance that we're going to go into now, because a lot of it is what we're going to find out this week.
Exactly. So these next 4 questions are much less projection based and much more real questions we have that we want answers to. The second one is this: does the number 1 defender off of the board solidify their position this week? Now, I'll go first on this one, JT, and you can give me your thoughts on my answer. My answer is very square. I think it's Jalen Carter. I think it was Jalen Carter coming into this week. I think it will be for sure him coming out of the week. He's the best football player in this draft for my money. Based on my evaluation so far, I've evaluated most of the top guys at some point to some extent. I feel comfortable saying I think that he is the most talented football player in the 2023 NFL draft. And I think that this weekend is going to do nothing but solidify that idea. He's the kind of guy that is just a freak athlete in terms of pure measurements and also his ability on the field. So regardless of what he chooses to do, it's going to look really good. And I also think that he's in a position where, already being pretty much at the top, he can pick and choose the specific things he does and doesn't do to just not pad his stats or pad his image, but bolster the idea that this guy has to go in the top 5, whichever is the first team to actually submit their draft card at the top of the draft that isn't in the quarterback chase, they're going to go after this guy, I think. The next guy, well, actually, I'll let you give me your thoughts on that, because in case my other person, or actually I have three other people that I want to mention, but not to step on your toes if one of them is your answer. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you that Jalen Carter is probably the most put together athlete as well as on the field. I think he has the best product. However, I think in terms of upside, I think we've kind of forgotten that Will Anderson Jr. is also a dog.
He's pretty good at football.
He's pretty good at football. And so my argument for this is Will Anderson might have an opportunity to kind of reestablish himself in that top first defensive pick off the board this week. And it's mostly because I think he's been pushed down to number 2 because of what we've talked about with a lot of guys coming out of Georgia, and the fact that a couple of those SEC schools, it feels like they don't get to show everything that they have in the tank most times on the field. So like in my evaluation of Will Anderson,
Georgia in particular, Georgia and Alabama in particular, those two, you're surrounded by so many studs. It can be difficult to stand out amongst the stars.
And so I think that he's suffering. He's gone down to maybe the second or third prospect on the defensive side of the ball, mostly because of an Alabama factor of he's just was limited to what he was able to do and what he could do. And I think if he's able to come out this week and show us that he has a more diverse set of moves in his drills and whatnot, I think he might be able to elevate himself back into that picture.
Well, and there's a KISS element to this, a keep it simple, stupid element to these things that I try to keep perspective on. With a lot of these guys who are clear NFL studs before they're even eligible for the draft, like Will Anderson was, I remember last year talking about him during and just after the college football season. Folks were like, okay, if he was in the draft this year, he'd be the number 1 overall pick. In the 2023 draft, he's for sure going to be the number 1 overall pick. And now things have changed. Alabama has the year that they have. He has the year that he has, kind of lackluster, pretty inconsistent. Guy like Jalen Carter, who was behind a lot of folks at Georgia who shipped off to the NFL last year, give him 1 year to shine, and he shined, and now he's kind of leapfrogged. He's leapfrogged to the top of the list. It could be one of those things where we're reminded, hey, Will Anderson, he's been that dude for a long time, for 2 years now. He's still that dude. And there's an element of narrative fatigue on some of these guys, I think, where we have to keep it simple, stupid a little bit and remind ourselves, just because we've been talking about this guy for 2 years doesn't mean he's boring and we should bump him down the list because he's not as fun to talk about or not as flashy. Like, he's still clearly a scheme-proof, fit-proof, star pass rushing monster, which is, for especially an interior big-bodied guy like he is, that's a massive deal. It's a big deal.
And I don't think you can go wrong. I think if anything, this year is like an upgrade. It's like a situation that happened with the first 2 defenders last year, but like an upgrade in that they're both really good. Like when you had Trayvon Walker and Aiden Hutchinson, you have the Aiden Hutchinson to Will Anderson comp, where he has been doing this for a long time and he knows, like, he's really good at football. And then you have the just absolute monster in talent and just how he stacks up as a person physically in the Trayvon Walker to Jalen Carter. Yep. And I think this year it's the fact that Jalen Carter is just better than Trayvon Walker. So it's kind of that traits versus.
Better say, like, that's where the metaphor breaks down, because Jalen Carter is going to be
which is why I'm just right. Like, it's an upgrade. You can't really lose with those two.
I'll make that clear. I think whichever team ends up with either of those guys, you can't. They're both going to be studs in the NFL. Like, they, in terms of can't miss prospects, you never want to say can't miss, but they are very scheme proof. I would argue, even though I think Anderson isn't better than Carter, I think Anderson may be the most scheme-proof guy in this class. And my reasoning on that really is just, what is the most scheme-proof thing that every single team in the league is looking for? Looking for pass rush. And Will Anderson can line up inside, he can line up outside. You could probably convince him to line up off ball. He's the kind of guy that's going to get after the quarterback for any team in any scheme, at any formation, at any position. That is going to work anywhere at any level. So that is going to be a guy that, even if you have him 2 on your board and you end up with him and not Jalen Carter, you're not leaving unhappy. Another guy that I want to get your thoughts on, and I have a feeling based on our talks earlier that you have thoughts on this guy as maybe one of the guys we walk away from the combine really questioning where we have him in the pecking order. This is not a big body guy. This is a pure, I mean, he's a big guy, don't get me wrong, but he's more of a pure edge type, pure rusher. It's Tyree Wilson. And to preface this, before you give your thoughts, a lot of buzz around the NFL in really kind of the past 48 hours, the past week or so at most, talking about how, hey, when you talk to some of these teams around the league, Tyree Wilson is at number 2 or even number 1 ahead of one or both of Carter and Anderson. There's a lot of teams really, really high on this guy.
I didn't think it has to do with like more traits than what he has technique wise right now. He's got a big lengthy frame. I mean, he is just a monster of a defensive edge. I think
let me correct myself real quick. I kept talking about Anderson and Carter like they're the big body guys compared to Wilson. I mixed this up in my head. Tyree Wilson is kind of the hybrid in between the two. He's 6'6",
really is. Yep.
275
Yep.
out of Texas Tech. So he is, I mean, he's got, goodness, he's got 2 or 3 inches on both of those guys, and he weighs more than Anderson and comes in about 25 pounds shorter of Carter, but he's a big fella.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that a lot of people see him as, of course, I think he's a 5th year this year, coming into this draft. So he might be, he's on the older side of those 3 prospects.
He's 22.9 years old, I believe.
So he might be a little bit older,
22.7 years old
than the other guys, to be considered that number 1 overall defensive guy.
He's a year older than both of them. Yeah.
And he does have some things. He is really good on the bull rush, almost to a fault sometimes. Yes. So I think a lot of it is that if we can see him kind of fine tune that this week, I think you have more and more people going away with this is going to be a top 7 guy, if not the first defensive guy overall.
No, I agree. I think that this is an instance, maybe an inflection point for his draft stock and the narrative around Tyree Wilson this week. We may leave Indy with the chatter only growing, or it may subside. I do think that if I had to bet whether it grows or shrinks, I know which one I'm picking, because when you just look at the raw elements of this guy, the raw potential, he's going to be just as big as anybody out there. 6'6", his leverage, you could be concerned about that, but based on his play, that's not really a massive concern. His frame is just, he might be that 6'6" height means his arms, nobody's outreaching him. He's maybe the longest defensive end I've ever evaluated. He's definitely one of the longest guys in the league the second he gets into the NFL. And his movement skills are really what make him, for 275 pounds. That's what makes him the kind of guy that could go in the top 10. So I could totally see at that size with that reach, if he goes out there and athletically blows some folks away, he could be in that top 3 discussion. It could get really interesting really fast. Another guy that I wanted to mention, 2 others that I want to mention real quick before we move on. 2 guys that I think that their narrative train, their draft stock train could really leave the station this week. Bryan Bresee and Lukas Van Ness. So Bresee, we've talked a little bit about on this show already, but he's a guy coming out of Clemson. He's physically got it there. Like in his body, he's got what you're looking for. He totally does. The biggest question, and he's one of the bigger interior guys, the biggest question with him is last year's tape was just really rough. He kind of lacks a lot of refinement that you would be looking for in a guy that, and he's young. He's a sophomore, so he's played 2 years. He's going to be on the younger side there, allowing a lot of teams to convince themselves that he's still got a lot of development to do, and he probably does. But despite his versatility, you can line him up inside or out pretty much anywhere on the defensive line, and he won't look out of place. He doesn't have a lot to show from last year, and it is complicated by the fact that I believe his younger sister died in the middle of the season, and so dealing with that emotionally, it is already on a week-to-week basis, the emotional instability of college kids as compared to the grown men in the NFL who are adults, working adults. The ups and downs emotionally, the inability to stay at stasis for these guys makes the game and the evaluation of individual players kind of tricky sometimes. But when you inject something like that for a kid who's, again, he's only a sophomore, he is a star prospect. I think he may have been the number 1 overall guy coming out in his class of high school. He was definitely a 5-star. He just had a rough 2022 as compared to what you would like to see. And he was really up and down. Like if you just watch, I think it was the Georgia Tech game, you're like, wow, okay, this guy is going to be a top 5 pick. And then it goes downhill from there pretty precipitously. I just don't know. He's got a little bit of I'm looking here. He's got a little bit of an injury history as well, towards ACL in 2021, had a shoulder injury that hampered him at the end of this past season. There's a number of different things that are going to be a big topic of discussion this week that may make or break his draft stock. But he's been one of those guys that when you look at the big boards, he's there near the top. But when you hear people talk about him and you listen to what fan bases are interested in him, he kind of seems like an odd man out right now, right? Do you think anybody's really gunning for Bryan Bresee?
Not exactly. I think he's definitely fallen down some boards, to not exactly his fault of his own, but just because there's so many guys who have surprised in their 2022, and it's just going to happen. If you have a down year in 2022 and other guys have their coming out season, they're going to be graded higher right now. In one of those guys is the other guy that you mentioned is Lukas Van Ness. I think he's got a lot of traits and he had a spectacular season this past year, 46 pressures
kind of the
and
polar
9
opposite
sacks.
of that. Yeah.
On the past season that make him a more attractive prospect at the moment.
No, I agree. I'm trying to pull up his numbers right here because I don't have his size off the top of my head. Do you happen to have it in front of you?
Lukas Van Ness?
Yeah. Oh, here we go. I've got it. He's a sophomore, 269, 6'5". So he's kind of in that same size profile. And you're right. His PFF grade, only 2 years in college, he graded out at 70.1 in 21, and then in 2022 an 80.2 in essentially the same number of snaps, increased role a little bit, but 9 sacks on the season and on 15 tackles, over 200 snaps as a pass defender and a run defender. He's the kind of guy that you've heard a lot about him being really just the top of that next tier of guys. I could totally see this draft ultimately shaking up as, okay, if you're tiering these defenders in the top 10 or 15, it is, which do you prefer in tier 1? Is it Jalen Carter or Will Anderson Jr.? And then in tier 2, do you prefer Lukas Van Ness or do you prefer Tyree Wilson? Like those 4 guys, I think, are going to, if I had to guess coming out of this weekend or this upcoming weekend, it's going to be those 4 guys solidifying themselves as the top 4 defenders in the class. They are the top 4 for my money. And I'm really interested to see for him, just how well does he test? Because he is a guy that we have on tape. The potential is there. He's young, the size, like everything is there. If he can show athletically that he's got some real promise, some real tools at his disposal, he could be right up there with, don't be shocked if he goes 3rd in the defenders. Maybe some team falls in love with him and he goes 2nd. Like it could get really interesting really fast.
No, for sure. And I think that's the whole thing. It's you have your clear-cut top 2 guys, and then it's going to be Tyree Wilson, and then a lot of guys whose stock just it has ebbed and flowed ever since the college season has ended, and it's time for them to show up, and we'll go out of this weekend having a little bit more clear picture.
Yep. So we'll keep an eye on Lukas Van Ness, and we'll keep it moving here. The third question, JT, and I'll let you give your answer first here. Looking at the secondary, and this is a stacked secondary, particularly cornerback class. How does this stacked group of secondary players shake out this weekend? Do you see certain guys rising or falling? Who do you think is going to benefit this week? Maybe who comes out of their shell and shows us something? What are your thoughts on the secondary group going into Indianapolis?
This question's really interesting to me because I think it's not a matter of like, is there a guy that's going to go into like the top 2 or 3 guys? It's more of how is this 4 through 7 guys going to shake out? Who's going to show us that that they are that their 3rd round grade right now makes them move up to maybe a 2nd round? Because I think right now, if you look at it, Devin Witherspoon and Christian Gonzalez are the bona fide number 1 and 2 of this cornerback class
so far. Yeah. Yep.
And it could absolutely turn on its head. We don't know. They could have a bad bad week and it just, everything changes up. But for
Right.
my
But
money
they're
right
the
now,
class so far. Yep.
but for my money, those two stay the same. I think where we see some movement is I think Joey Porter Jr. Kind of separates himself as the number 3 option here.
He's the guy you
this
expect
weekend.
to be your 3 coming out
I
of the
think so.
weekend.
And it's really hard because I was listening to
There's so many good ones. It's
there's
so
many
hard.
good ones.
It's so hard.
And friend of the show, I was listening to James Foster from A to Z earlier this week, and he had a great point in which for cornerbacks, it's so hard to rank them because everybody's scheme is different. There might be a team,
Yep.
there might be a team who loves Joey Porter Jr., who's incredible and might be the best press coverage guy in this class. And he might go to one of those in the top 10 there because one of those teams just likes that scheme better and they're going to take him first. So it's really hard. I think 2 other guys that I'm going to name real quick to keep an eye
JT,
on.
can I speak to that point real quick? Because I think that's a really bright one and an interesting one. Was James talking about that on one of his YouTube videos, I'm guessing?
Yeah, I was watching a little bit more some more film on, I believe it was either Christian Gonzalez or Joey Porter, and he pointed that out, and I was like, that is actually makes a lot of sense, and it makes it a little bit harder to kind of see where these guys are going to go.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I agree totally, and that's an idea that I've had floating around in my head that you've kind of solidified into one coherent thought. When I look at this cornerback group, kind of the polar opposite of what we were talking about with Will Anderson and Jalen Carter, right? Where they're scheme proof. They're going to, the skill set that they bring is going to translate for any defensive scheme, any defensive equation. They're going to be able to plug and play. With these cornerbacks, it's so difficult to rank them, like you say, because I see them as it's kind of like playing Mario Kart or Super Smash, right? Like it's each of these guys is, or Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games. Like each of these there's so many options and they all kind of specialize in different things. There are some Marios and Luigis out there, some all around guys, dudes that you trust to work in man, work in press coverage, work in zone coverage. They could, they've got the physical ability and movement ability to translate to play safety sometimes, or maybe they're a hybrid that you could see playing a press corner safety, bring them up and play them as on a big body tight end. Like there's a handful of guys that have that positional versatility, but a lot of them are, at least based on what we've seen them do, how we've seen them utilized in college, a lot of them are really not scheme dependent, but they are specialists at a certain thing. Some of these guys are fantastic in man coverage. Some of them are fantastic in zone. Some of them are, all right in one, but you can tell that they shine in another. And it's going to just depend on what are you looking for? Like if a team's trying to pick their Mario character, to do the downhill slalom and skiing, to continue this Mario and Sonic at the Winter Olympic Games metaphor, they're going to be looking for, if their game is downhill skiing, they're going to be looking for a different guy than the team whose game is, the snowboarding half pipe. Like we need people that can do different things. And so the way that this board shakes out on draft night, it's going to be kind of impossible to predict, right? It's going to be who needs what, who thinks each player can fit into their scheme the best, I guess.
Yeah, and that was kind of my point into how I was kind of viewing this question as we have like the top 3 guys who just like from traits and how they play the game and from everything we saw for the last year, they are the bona fide top 3, whether they are scheme dependent or not. However, right, when you get to the second and third round, that's where we can see a lot of these guys this week kind of raise their stock. And 2 of those guys that I had in mind here were Cam Smith from South Carolina, who is just wicked smart and just understands the game so well.
I've heard this as well. Did you read this about him?
Yeah. So he is kind of sees the game just like not just from his position, but he understands the game so well that he is able to make plays despite his size. He's one of these guys who is a little undersized physically,
kind of a quarterback mind in the way that he sees the full field, right?
And he plays the game a little bit like a wide receiver playing the cornerback position. But
not
like
to throw
you
the dirt of this comp on him, but in that way, he's kind of a Trayvon Diggs.
A
in
little
the
bit,
sense that
yeah.
he doesn't, and he's,
And
we're
exactly.
not fond of Trayvon Diggs as a cornerback, but that is an element of his game that makes him, I mean, at least from the turnover standpoint, it's pretty nice.
It's pretty nice, but then just like Trayvon Diggs, it's where you get beat a lot. This past
Yes.
season, he had a PFF grade of 49.6 in coverage and man, which
Mm-hmm.
is not what you want to see.
No.
So, I mean, like you just said, actually, Trayvon Diggs is a perfect comp for him, and he might just be an even smarter Trayvon Diggs because he just sees the field that well. One more that I have here is Travius Hodges-Tomlinson from TCU, who, funny enough, I was reading today, is actually the nephew of LaDainian Tomlinson, which is really interesting. Yeah,
I had no idea. Hey,
I had no idea either. But
gene pool is there then. Like it.
The gene pool is there. Unfortunately, he's 5'9", 180 currently is how he's listed for a quarterback.
He's in a gene pool with a Hall of Fame running back. So what are you going to do? That's how it works.
So I'm excited to see him because he is just like his uncle LT. He is insanely fast when in coverage. So I'm interested to see, despite his size, what he can do.
So I love that, and that's not a guy that was on my radar, but I'm going to have to add him because that intrigues me a lot. I have two guys that I've written down that I want to focus most in on this week, and the number one guy is I feel bad continuing to hitch myself to this guy's wagon because I'm higher on him than most, but I don't think he's the best cornerback in the league or in the draft class. I just think people are far more down on him than he belongs. I think a lot of boards have him as their cornerback 7, 8, 9, 10. I think he's more like a cornerback 4 or 5 in this class. It's Kelee Ringo out of Georgia. And the reason why I think this weekend may be the weekend that flips the narrative on him, flips his draft stock and allows him to continue or start to rise is that in this controlled environment, again, I'm trying to tailor my thoughts on this as to who is going to benefit from this unusual, not very football-like environment of the combine. Drills, exercises, measurements, focusing in on the traits and as well as the person. He's the kind of athlete that is going to absolutely shine in this controlled environment. He's going to, I think it sets up perfectly for him to tempt a ton of scouts and GMs with his traits. 6'2", 210, no concerns there, right? He's a sophomore, he's young, no concerns there. His combination of size at 6'2", 210 and speed at cornerback, life's a lot easier when you're really fast and you're wicked big. And that's kind of the territory he's in. He's not crazy fast or crazy big outlier in terms of it being an outlier in those statistics, but he is big and he is fast, something that at cornerback makes you really attractive out of the gate. If you can combine that with athleticism, movement ability to perform in these drills that he's probably going to do, it could be a situation where his rare athleticism makes him kind of stand out among the rest and make a lot of folks reconsider their opinion on him, because a lot of the opinion on him has been based on the tape. And the tape, again, with Georgia defenders, I just have a massive Georgia defense asterisk next to all of these Georgia defenders, because the way that they play the game and the level of ability that they have as a unit, the things that they can do as a defensive unit that you can't do with other teams in college football, you probably aren't going to be able to do in the NFL, because you're not going to have as stacked a group as compared to your opponent each and every week as Georgia does every time that they line up to play football. They get to do certain things that aren't going to be as practical in the NFL. In particular, they limit a lot of the things that their defenders do. They don't need them to be versatile because they have a specialist that can do each thing, right? That's what I'm ultimately trying to say. Like, the reason why you don't get to see Kelee Ringo play as much press man and zone is because they don't need him to. The reason why you don't have to have, the defensive linemen that come out of Georgia and seem to meet expectations, if not overperform expectations in the NFL every year, is because they're not asked to necessarily rush in the way that defensive linemen or, edge defenders or outside linebackers are asked to in the NFL. They're asked to be a big body in the middle and just run stuff, or they're asked to just rush, but they don't get asked a lot to step back into coverage, or they're just asked to be a coverage linebacker and they're not asked to be a run stopper. Like, that makes it difficult to evaluate. And with Kelee Ringo, I think that's a big part of the evaluation. Every single time I have heard somebody that I respect talk about Kelee Ringo, or right about Kelee Ringo. It's been, well, the tape is just underwhelming, and it makes it difficult to evaluate him because he's coming from Georgia, and Georgia's one of those places. I think this might be the time. This might be the week where we finally see folks have been a little bit wrong on him. They've been a little bit down on him. So I'm excited to see Kelee Ringo this week and see his pure athleticism shine on the fast track. The other guy, JT, and this one you might have, I'll hear your thoughts on either of these guys here in a second. It's Christian Gonzalez. He is a clear top 2 cornerback in this draft right now, but I think that he's a guy that could take the clear lead, even jumping. I'm totally blanking on dude's name.
Devin Witherspoon.
Yeah, thank you, Devin Witherspoon. He could end up jumping Witherspoon on most big boards this week, purely because with Christian Gonzalez, crazy young player. I think he's not even 21 years old yet. I'm going to pull it up here so that I can be sure, but he's really young. He has a rare combination of positional versatility, his ability, which he demonstrated in college, to play press man as well as zone at a high level. That versatility paired with his movement ability, which I think is going to shine in these drills, is going to make him, I think, stand out ahead of even Devin Witherspoon, because I just think that the things that he offers at the cornerback position are ridiculous.
I think so too. It totally could happen, mostly because Devin Witherspoon just had the insane year that he had, and that's kind of why we've put him at the number 1 overall, because he was the best corner this past year. And I think when we see them match up this week, it totally could flip flop. But I think there's no question that those are the top 2. As for Kelee Ringo, I'm more excited.
Christian Gonzalez is barely 20 and a half years old, 6'2", 201. So he's very young. Devin Witherspoon, for comparison, 6 foot, 180, significantly lighter, a couple inches shorter, and he's 22 years old and change now. So I think that those things, the combine, we're highlighting, we are focusing in on, maybe even to a fault, traits. And from a traits perspective, it's Gonzalez over Witherspoon.
I agree with you there. It's just, we're going to see the ability, and I think the what's the word I'm looking for? The vision on the field this week in a couple drills that might put one or the other over the top. And just to get off this one, this question, I think Kelee Ringo is in that exact same boat. I think for him, just seeing him on his own and not in that Georgia atmosphere is going to be super important.
All right, last 2 questions, and we didn't intentionally do it this way, JT, but it was wise of us to, because these last 2 questions leave the least room for us to ramble and go on tangents about. So we'll be quicker with these. Number 4, who's the sleeper that everybody leaves Indianapolis next week whispering about?
For me, and this is really interesting, I attacked this one because specifically I heard something that Mina Kimes said on ESPN earlier this week about not who I'm saying is a sleeper, but another guy in the same positional class in Bijan Robinson, in that she said something along the lines that Bijan Robinson's going to make the argument to take running backs in the late to mid first round again. And while I agree with that, I think Bijan is the bona fide number 1, someone who is a sleeper who could totally find their way up boards this week and also become the second running back in the first round, is Jahmyr Gibbs. I've been falling more and more in love with this prospect just because of how fast he is. This man has 7 different gears of speed that he can turn on whenever he wants.
Everything. Yeah, no, and I'm with you.
The way he sees the field and then evaluates, I'm just going to go this speed and just beat you on the outside or turn it on in just an instant like that. It's insane to watch him.
It's the top end speed combined with the acceleration, right? Because we're already expecting him to be like a top 10 40 time guy this weekend.
Oh, he's my number 1 to watch. I think he could have the number 1 top. He could have the best 40 time this week because I think he is just that fast.
But like a sports car, he doesn't have, it doesn't take time for him to get up to that speed. Like he can Lamborghini pull around guys. If he decides to turn it on, he can turn it on like that, and then it's on.
Exactly. I currently where I'm starting to give my early what is the word? They're comparisons to players currently in the NFL.
Took us a while. There we go.
It took
Player
us a while.
comps. We're on
player comps. There
Yep,
it is.
Yep.
Jahmyr Gibbs to me is like just a little bit better Miles Sanders plus the speed and agility of a Darren Sproles, which if you put the two together and can kind of see where my brain's going,
Philadelphia.
I could see him.
Back.
I could see him using. I could see them using their second first round pick and he becoming the second running back taken in the
Howie
first
Roseman
round.
he's too analytically driven to go and run that card up at 10. They're not. I'll be surprised if they take him at 10. But if he's still there for the second pick, wouldn't shock me at all, man.
He's just another Miles Sanders for another 5 years on that rookie deal. Like they don't have to pay Miles Sanders, and
he'll be 10 times I think he'll be 10 times the running back Miles Sanders is. I don't think Miles is a great running back. I think Bijan is a can't miss running back. There's been a lot of chatter about him this week on most draft boards. If we're talking purely who's the best football players in this draft, there's an argument to be made that maybe Bijan Robinson is the best football player at his position in the draft. Like the best, not at positionless, but the best at what he does in this draft. I think that he is that good, and somebody's going to take him higher than they probably should, but it's really going to be, does the right team take him? Because if you take him in the first and you're a team like Philadelphia, who is a contender, who's looking to just, add some guys in the draft at the top of the draft who can be impact players now, I have zero problem with drafting running back. Zero, especially Bijan Robinson. If you're a team like, take the Raiders, for example, who are not in a position to contend right away, are not reasonably, a piece or two away, I don't think it's a wise move to get him at any level. Even if it's like, oh, he slipped for some reason. We get him at the fourth pick in the second round. I still don't think that's wise. It's really just positional value when paying attention to what your team needs and where they're at in the trajectory, the arc of their build.
I agree. And I think that's the argument to be made there. Just quickly before we get on a tangent, that's why Bijan, I think
Jahmyr Gibbs is who we're talking about
Jahmyr
here.
Gibbs, but
there's your preview on Bijan Robinson for the week. We'll talk more about him later. Now for the sleeper, Jahmyr Gibbs.
So Jahmyr Gibbs could be one of those guys who we find in I think the perfect fit for him is a Philadelphia Eagle, and he could find his way into either one of the first 3 picks of the second round or all as early as a late first rounder.
I agree. I actually went with a guy that is in the same position. It's Tyjae Spears, which is, I know this is so square. I hate that I picked this. I really do hate that I do. The hype, at least in Nashville, but I think nationally for the most part, since his really fantastic Senior Bowl performance and Senior Bowl week has continued, I just kind of think this weekend or this week and weekend is going to, that hype train's just going to get refueled. Like pull into the station, fuel up, and just keep on chugging down the tracks, man, because based on what we heard and saw and what I've watched on tape since then and what I have heard, how well he expects to run, how well he is expected to look in these drills, his athleticism, his movement ability, his acceleration, all of these things. It's just, I don't see it not showing well in this controlled environment. I think it's going to look really, really good. And I had to make him my pick. I think the Tennessee market in particular is going to continue to fall in love with him as a potential late round draft pick, later, mid to late round pick, maybe heir apparent to Derrick Henry. I don't think it's going to happen. I think ultimately he's a guy that is going to sneak up into the second round when it's all said and done. I'll be pretty surprised if he's a third round pick by the end of all of this. I think his stock is just going to continue to rise and rise and rise. And I'm curious where he ends up on the consensus board. I'm going to actually look up to see where he is right now, because I know last I checked, he was rising through the fourth, through the third. Let's see where folks have him on the consensus board right now. He is, so he was like a north of 150 overall, and he's now at 92, projected to be a third round guy. I think it's just going to continue to climb. I think somebody ends up getting him at the end of the second, but he'll definitely go on that second day.
No, I agree. I think, and it's a slippery slope for Titans fans who know that Derrick Henry's contract's up and might as well just find the next one,
And come draft time, you don't know he's going to still be on the roster. As a show, we tend to think that he will be. I think it's more likely than not that he is, but we don't know.
No, for sure. And then
Ready
For
for
a
the last
final
question
question, yeah, let's
here? Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
let's hit it.
Sorry.
Speaking of Tennessee Titans, let's
Speaking of
talk more
Tennessee
about the
Titans,
Titans.
let me pitch this last question to you. The last question we went Titan specific. What is the biggest position that the Titans should be / will be focusing on this week? Who are they going to dial in on and why?
For me, I think we both kind of went with the same idea here.
Yep, I agree with your answer, and I'm sure you agree with mine.
And it's mostly just because we know how this team fared last year, and I'm going to go with the cornerback position mostly because of just how deep it is. I think the biggest thing here is that you have to look at what the Titans had to deal with last year. I think it's very important to find your guy, whether it doesn't have to be a first rounder, but find your guy in the second, third, or fourth round who is healthy, one, and fits what Ran and Vrabel want to do on that side of the ball, and not fall into a trap where we have to go out. We have to go out and get like an Andrew Adams or a Lonnie Johnson Jr. or a Terrence Mitchell in the middle of the season. I think it's the most important position for them.
Can I add a number 3 to your list?
Yeah,
there?
for sure.
Number 3 has to be for me, and I'm curious if you agree. No more small cornerbacks. No, it's nice. Some of them work out, but we've seen firsthand for the Titans, they go and spend a second round pick on a stud in the SEC in his senior or his final year. They go and bring him in, and it's fine. It's okay. He has kind of an up and down season, and he's going to end up being a guy that works, I think, long term. He's going to be a starting caliber cornerback for the rest of his career. But it's a situation where his size was a significant issue at a number of junctions in the season that were not all that beneficial. So
yeah, and I think
by the way, I'm talking about Roger McCreary, in case anybody didn't pick up on that. I don't know. Did I mention his name once?
I don't
Roger
think so.
McCreary.
I was confused.
Old T-Rex arms. That's what I'm talking about. Old T-Rex arms, Roger McCreary, who the Titans drafted in the second round last year.
I'm sure this is something that'll come up when we talk to Ran on Tuesday during his availability, and I'm sure the big word collaboration will come up on Tuesday. I can almost put money on it. But I think if there's any position that Vrabel and Carthen need to find their guy at together and working together, it's at the cornerback.
So my answer, I agree. I think that's, if I hadn't already picked offensive line when you picked yours, would offensive line be your number one priority?
Yeah.
Did you pick okay. Just making sure. So I think
you put your answer in there, and I was like, all right, I'll flex mine to the other one.
For the show. No, I appreciate it for the culture. Well done on that. So I went with offensive line for obvious reasons. It's not only the most important position for the Titans to be addressing in free agency and the draft this offseason, but it's the position group that they are the weakest at right now. I checked today, JT, they only have 3 offensive linemen currently on contract for next year. So that's not very good. They're obviously going to be looking at an offensive lineman, strongly considering it at the very least at 11, probably going to draft one. The thing that I think they're going to be looking for this week, and I broke this down a little bit further, they need to be finding the right combination of size, athleticism, and health. And I think there are lessons to learn on that front from Dillon Radunz and Dennis Daly last year, who, outside of Taylor Lewan playing a game and a couple of snaps before going down with an injury, those were the guys that you saw play left tackle. Dennis Daly far more than Radunz, but let me elaborate on what I mean from finding the right guy from a traits perspective. With Dillon Radunz, he has the length to be a tackle in the NFL. He's got the arm length. He's got 34-inch arms. He's got the height, the build, the size. He's not getting plowed over because he's not heavy enough. But his movement ability, his footwork is really rough. And that's a big part of, if not the number one reason why he was not made the left tackle earlier. And a big part of the reason why they've been hesitant to really give him much playing time at all in his first 2 seasons. He's also a guy that I don't think he had a ton of injury concerns coming out, but he's not been the healthiest in the NFL so far. And now he's, got an ACL injury. It was an ACL, right? It was a knee injury. I think it was an ACL. that he at the very end of the season, it's going to keep him probably from really ever being effective in any way next season as well. With a guy like Dennis Daly, he also has the size and an ability to play left tackle, but he doesn't have the movement skills. I want to contrast that with a guy like Peter Skoronski, who I think most draft evaluators consider him to be the most talented offensive lineman in this draft class, but he's just not got the length, according to many, including me, to play tackle at the next level. I think he's going to be the next 20, with the cap increasing, maybe $25 million man at the guard position. He's going to be the next Quentin Nelson and just be a stud, murdering people at the guard position, be a 10, 15-year guard. But I don't know, despite the fact that he's made it very clear he wants to have a chance to play tackle, he wants to be diverse positionally, the where he's played and where he practices, but he wants to focus in on tackle and be given a chance to play tackle. He's hired certain agents to be able to get him a deal when he's striking his rookie contract as a more of a tackle than as a positional flex guy or an inside guy. I don't think that they're going to fall in love with him, because while he has the movement ability, he has the athleticism, he is the best athlete in this draft playing offensive line at that size, height, weight, and speed. He doesn't have the physical traits you're looking, the benchmarks you're looking for. It doesn't have the length that you want. He's not going to be long enough to contend with some of these crazy long Tyree Wilson sized edge rushers in the NFL. So I don't think that that's going to be a situation where the Titans delude themselves into falling in love with a guy that doesn't meet the physical benchmarks, doesn't have the length, the height, weight, or speed, or that they delude themselves into falling in love with a guy like a Dennis Daly, who they didn't draft, but a guy along those lines, or like a Dylan Radins, who has the physical length, height, weight, speed. They've got the traits when you measure them and, you poke and you prod, but in terms of their movement ability, their athleticism, their ability to play the position, it's lacking. I think that's the perfect balance that they're going to be looking for. And at the 11th pick, I do find it interesting this week. How much do we see them paying attention to Paris Johnson Jr., who is, for my money, he's the most commonly mocked guy to one team at this point in the offseason. It seems like everybody and their brother thinks the Titans at 11 with Paris Johnson Jr. is the match made in heaven. It's kind of already been written in. I for a while now have thought he's going to be too hyped up to fall to 11. I think that he's going to be gone by then. And there's always a chance that the really popular guy, the Titans, may just fall in love with another guy. So the question for me is, if he's not there at 11, or if they don't love him for 11, maybe there's somebody else they fall in love with. Who's it going to be? Who do they focus in on this week? Is it Peter Skoronski? Is it a guy in Broderick Jones? Is it DeJuan Jones? Is it Anton Harrison? Like, those are the 4 or 5 guys that if they go tackle at 11 and they don't go, or even in the early second round, or if they, choose that they don't want Paris Johnson to be their guy at 11, who are they interested in? What do they focus most in on this week with that position group, and who individually are they focused most in on? I find that really interesting.
I do too, and it sucks because, like, I think even though he is drafted there, I think Paris Johnson Jr. would be such a great fit, and I'm sure we'll get more into that this week. Not just from a plug and play perspective, but from a leadership perspective and whatnot. But yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see if how much they get to know him there, and how much they get to know all the other guys in case they have to turn to plan B. If they really like him and he's gone, they might have to go with someone else.
Yep. All right. That's it. That's our show. This is our 5 big questions. Just to recap the questions that we're going to be, and we have infinity more questions we're looking to answer, but the big 5 ones that we covered today: which quarterback's going to shine above the rest? Does the number 1 defender in this draft solidify their position this week? How does this stacked group of secondary players shake out? Who rises, who falls? Who's the sleeper that everybody leaves the combine whispering about? And what is the biggest position the Titans are going to focus on this week? This has been our 2023 NFL Combine Primer. And the next time you hear us on this podcast feed, we'll be live from Indianapolis at the NFL Combine. JT, crazy excited, in case I haven't mentioned it 10,000 times already. I'm going to get back to pulling some stuff together, packing up, getting ready to go, continuing to dive into as much film and notes and articles and podcasts as I can to prepare myself. But I can't wait to see you Tuesday morning, buddy. Can't wait for us to drive up there and have one of the best weeks ever, getting to really do for a living what is something I do for free. So I'm really enjoying this and looking forward to it. And it's never a day wasted that you get to spend your life, your livelihood is watching football and evaluating football players. Pretty awesome gig. So I count myself really lucky and blessed to do that. Can't wait. Just to get everybody on the same page for this week, once again, we'll have a show each and every day, live show in the afternoon or the evenings, recapping what we've talked about. Ton of content on Twitter, social media, clips on YouTube, all of that good stuff. So make sure to check it out. If you've got friends and family that are interested in this kind of thing, point them our way. Make sure to not take this week off listening to the show. Please do that. Listen to the show. Please tune in with us live in the afternoons or the evenings. We want to be able to answer your questions. We're probably going to do a combine mailbag or two as the week goes on, or after the combine when we get back, just answering some questions, as we'll have gathered as much information as we can and have plenty to share with the class. So if you have questions or want to give us things you want us to go the next day, dig into, please come join us in the live shows during the week and send us in your questions via Twitter or via, the replies to our tweets, or via DM or via email, whatever it may be. We appreciate all of that. Please tune in live, check out the YouTube show, check out the podcast, all that good stuff. Until, I guess, the next show on this feed will be, I guess it'll show up Wednesday morning. You'll probably get to see the live show Tuesday night. But until then, for producer JT, I'm your host, Easton Freeze. Next time you hear from us, we'll be live from Indianapolis. Can't wait to talk to you then.